this is Liz from People I Think Are Cool, a bi-weekly podcast where I interview my favorite creatives from across the globe. If you're looking for a dose of creative inspiration, then go to peopleithinkarecool.com or subscribe to People I Think Are Cool on iTunes and Stitcher.
You like film, from cult to classic, from blockbuster to B-movies. And there just isn't that one place with all the fan fervor and passion that's covering the kind of mad, diverse brilliance that you love.
Well, that's where you're wrong.
AfterMovieDiner.com is that fan-built movie nirvana just for you, featuring the sweet, sweet writings of the wife dork herself. AfterMovieDiner.com. Go there. Be the best you can be.
You are listening to the In the Mouth of Dorkness podcast, the official podcast of the Alamo Drafthouse, Winchester.
Welcome to another edition of the It Modcast podcast. Joining us is Brian Young, the Turtle Dork.
Happy Friday, folks.
Also joining us is Lisa Gullickson, wife dork.
As if.
And Brad Gullickson, mouth dork.
What's up?
And also joining us is Billy Dash, the indie dork.
I can't. Hey,
Don't be no scrub, Billy. Get a quote up. You're not banging or slamming tonight.
And I'm your host,
He's
Dennis
also
Smith,
known as a busta.
the disco dork. And welcome to another edition of the It Modcast podcast, Fistful Friday.
How's it hanging, everybody?
It's hanging.
Eat my shorts.
Oh,
All right. Let's get real. Let's get jiggy. We got to get jiggy with it.
All right.
Giddy up.
In honor of the release of Jonah Hill's directorial debut, mid-90s, we have a fistful of 90s, or apparently a fistful of 90s slang. So, yeah. Brian, do you want to kick it off with your number 5?
Let me just take a hit off these heady nuggets.
Oh my god.
oh my God.
Now, you're just reading random shit. I wouldn't trust that list, Brad, because I'm pretty sure no one ever said that in the 90s.
Heady nuggets is real potent weed, Darren.
Heady nuggets?
Yeah, it's not gank, that's for sure.
All right.
It's real fine.
I'm new to the weed game, so I'm not up on my 90s weed terminology. I'm sorry.
Don't be a fart knocker.
I won't.
Let's do this.
Brian, I need you to talk.
Now, in the arts, we call it medicine.
Oh,
Yeah, but that medicine costs a lot of dead presidents.
Brian.
so starting with my list.
Auger.
Yeah, so when we came up with this last week, it was just like, okay, 90s, that can encompass a lot. That's a vast category that we can kind of cover so many different things with that decade, whether we talk about movies, music, comic books, whatever the case is.
We want a real bomb list.
I think this list is going to be really, really interesting. So some of the things I'm focused on is like maybe tropes and trends of the 90s, specifically with some movies and some other stuff. But one of the, and it actually goes to your quote, Brad. One of the trends I noticed was like the parody of hood movies in the 90s, where you would have Don't Be a Menace to South Central while drinking your juice in the hood. Of course, Scary Movie was 2000, but we all know that, you know, the 90s decade, it usually takes a couple of years into the next decade before you actually, you know, get rid of the past decade. So the 90s kind of went into like maybe 2002, 2003. So, but Scary Movie, High School High, you would have movies like that would always kind of parody the movies of like Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society. So
I'm gonna get you, sucker.
Yeah, I just
that's a hella good pick.
That's from the 80s, though, right?
Yeah, I didn't know if that was 80s. That may have been the
man.
late 80s.
Damn.
Be careful there, B.
Yeah.
I just watched that like a week ago.
But no,
Holds up.
That's just not a fresh pick. Sorry.
But yeah, I would say specific.
I'm sorry for cutting you off.
I would say
Brad
specifically
keep dropping these
probably,
old ass slang terms.
Hey, it's my crib. We do what we want, and it's all dope shit here.
Look at my shit. Yeah, but Don't Be a Menace. I would say that had to be kind of like one of the pinnacles. Of course, that came out, I believe, early in the year in 1996.
Yeah.
Of the pinnacle of like the parody of hood movies that was so prominent in the early 90s. High School High, a little less than. That really wasn't a great one, but. And just parody movies in general. I mean, we were getting a lot of those towards the late 90s. But I think the Wayans did something. I mean, they really struck a chord, I think, with Don't Be a Menace. And I think that movie still kind of holds up. And it rings so true to a lot of the different themes that they call out in a lot of those hood movies. And are able to kind of make fun of those things in a very smart and clever way. So yeah, that's a movie that I'm definitely still fond of to this day. So yeah, that's my number 5.
All right. Jesus Christ.
Lisa, you're number 5.
So with my Fistful, I decided to go autobiographical. So the thing had to happen to me in the 90s, and the film had to be from the 90s.
Booyah!
So I can't include my 13th birthday that was ruined because of I wanted to watch Weird Science and my sister wanted to watch Great Balls of Fire. I can't tell that story again.
Real buzzkill.
I can't tell the story of my first date ever because that movie was U571 and that was after the 90s.
Jesus.
I was not very popular. I was what you call a late bloomer. So I'm going to start with the year 1995. I did see this film in the theater, and it was the first time I had love at first sight. Like, literally, the wind was knocked out of me by the beauty of Devon Sawa, and that movie was Casper. He played Casper as a real boy, and I remember that crush feeling of like all of the air escapes your body, and then your
Get
cheeks
a room,
get
you
all
two.
I don't know. He was like an angel before me, and I was like, I'm a woman now.
It was Superfly.
Yeah. It was Soup's dreamy. And it was the first time where I was like, who is that guy? I'm going to research it. And by research it in that day, I asked my sister. And my sister's like, you've got a crush. You've got a crush. She was always horrible about that and scarred me to this day. I have another story relating to that will come up in this list later.
All right. Brad, you're number 5.
So yeah, obviously I want to have a dope list. It's a hard thing to do, but it's all good. I'm going chronologically in my life. I'm going to start in the year 1991. And this is around the time I started reading comic books, which is a real baller thing. We all know that. But not back then. It was not at all hip. It was very lonely, actually. But in 1991, a great comic book movie came out. A film that had an eye on the past, and one that sparked my interest because of how much I hate Nazis and still hate Nazis. That's The Rocketeer, based on Dave Stevens' comic book. And it's a Disney film. It is directed by Joe Johnston, who would go on to direct Captain America, the First Avenger, but not before directing Jurassic Park 3.
What movie?
Yeah. But The Rocketeer, one, it's an amazing design. They really captured Dan Stevens' character. They just pulled it right out of the page. And so often in the 90s, the problem was, we're going to take this comic book character, we're going to slap some leather on him, and he's going to look nothing like his cartoon or his 4-color form. And I'm amazed at what a little miracle of a movie that The Rocketeer is, and how much fun it is, how it can still kick ass, feel adult, and yet speak to every person in the room, whether they're a kid or grandpa, your World War vet grandpa. I love The Rocketeer. And you would think, oh, wow, the 90s, they've cracked it. Batman came out in 1989. We're finally going to get some amazing comic book movies. Not so much. You did get a lot of weird comic book movies after The Rocketeer. Even though that film bombed, you would get Dick Tracy, The Phantom, The Shadow, other properties that they were reaching into the past. The thing is The Rocketeer wasn't reaching into the past. It was a contemporary comic book that was retro obsessed.
I didn't realize it was a contemporary comic book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway,
He had that classic '90s hair with the perfectly flat irons
for
to the
sure,
sides,
for
and
sure.
then hard in the middle.
Insufferable. What's 90s slang for insufferable?
I'm not sure I know what you mean.
All right, Billy, you're number 5.
All right, so I'm gonna start personal for this one.
Oh snap!
Yeah. Oh, God damn it. The problem is I'm gonna laugh every time I do that.
Quit icing my grill. Let's go.
Stop.
All right. So
For all of our sakes, stop encouraging him.
I'm gonna stop. No, I'm not gonna stop. You're gonna stop. I'm gonna start. I'm gonna start personally. So, for the 90s, that's I think a big coming of age for me. So I was 8 to 18. So a lot of my childhood memories come out of the 90s. And I think one movie that I have come to love and appreciate, but I did not appreciate at all at the time, was Jim Carrey's The Cable Guy. I really like the dark story of a lonely, obsessed man latching on to Matthew Broderick and worming his way into his life and slowly ruining it. I like that. I appreciate it as a story. But young Billy did not appreciate that because, very literally, of the scene in which he is in prison and Jim Carrey puts his breast to the window and says, "Oh, Billy!" I have heard that from every person that I have met at some point in my relationship with them, for fucking sure.
Not with me. I've never said that to you.
So you're saying today's the day you should hear it from me?
Yes, I think so. No, but everybody that I run into, that's the thing that they come to. Billy comes up as a reference point, and Oh Billy. It's either Oh Billy or Billy Baru from Caddyshack. Billy Baru, I'm fine with. I like Caddyshack. That's a fine thing.
Oh,
Judge
Billy.
Smails. But Oh Billy, that was a permanent fixture of my life for a significant portion of the 90s. Less and less as you've gone on from there because people have kind of forgotten about that movie, which makes it sort of sad in my eyes because it's an interesting movie, but I'm kind of okay with it on account of that. So
I generally get, Lisa, your teeth are big and green, Lisa.
Oh, man.
You smell like gasoline. That's also from the 90s.
That's just shady.
That's awful.
And I was not allowed to watch The Simpsons at the time, so I just found it very extra hurtful. There were layers to my hurt.
Sorry.
And then they sing, Lisa, it's your birthday, happy. And I'm like, I'm still not allowed to see that show. That doesn't make it any better.
All right. For my number 5, I'm going to go from 95 down to 91. So 95 is a crazy year for movies. I mean, in addition to the classic Lisa mentioned, Casper, 7 came out that year. The Usual Suspects, Heat, Clueless, Jumanji, Apollo 13.
In the Mouth of Madness, our namesake.
Yes, In the Mouth of Madness. Friggin' Braveheart came out that year. 12 Monkeys came out that year. Robert De Niro had Heat and Casino drop the same year.
95 was the shiznit. 95 was the shiznit.
Batman Forever came out that year, so no, it was not.
Edit him out.
Let's see. Leaving Las Vegas came out that year. Mortal Kombat came out that year. Showgirls came out that
Mortal
year.
Kombat.
Friday came out that year. The Quick and the Dead came out that year.
Goddamn.
Bad Boys, Brian, came out in 95.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. April. I remember.
But the movie that I'm going to pick from that year is, in spite of all those other movies, is Robert Rodriguez's Desperado. Because in 1995,
Swing.
the particular headspace I was in at that time was of the independent, do-it-yourself filmmaker. You know, Pulp Fiction had come out, Reservoir Dogs had come out, and I had seen El Mariachi at this point. And so, I had become familiar with John Woo at this point. So now I'm just full blown into, cinema and the filmmaking process. And Robert Rodriguez is, down and dirty, do it yourself, me and whoever I can get, me and one other guy. His attitude, his process in doing that, made it feel accessible to me. and just how open he was with his process, whether it be with his books, whether it be with his special features that he would put on his DVD, went a long way to make that feel like an open and accessible process for me. And that's what got me into picking up my first 8mm camera and making movies on my own. And so, all those other movies came out, and I love a lot of those films, and they have a special place in my heart and specifically on my Blu-ray shelf. But this one was more tangible to me because it got me into, it was one of the films that got me into the filmmaking process. And a lot of Robert Rodriguez's tips that he would give, I would implement that into how I make my films. And whether it be shooting and editing at the same time, or editing in camera, or just his camera placement and things like that. I learned a lot just from his the information that he gave out. So that's a big deal to me. So I have to have that as my number 5.
I'm down with that. Jesus Christ.
Brian, you're number 4.
All right, so I'm gonna continue with my trend of focusing on trends and tropes from the 90s. And another trend that was going on in the 90s was hip hop soundtracks. Or hip hop artists being on certain soundtracks to movies. We saw this a lot in the 90s. This was very prevalent. I mean, if you can go back to Deep Cover with Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg. It goes through all types of movies. I mean, when you talk about movies like The Nutty Professor, or even Martin Lawrence Blue Streak, where he had Jay-Z, or even like just the aforementioned that I did in my last High School High with Wu-Tang Clan with Wu Wear. So many different. I mean, it was almost like in that period, in order to get on as an artist, like you would try to attach yourself to one of these big soundtracks that were coming out in the 90s to any of these movies.
Well, Brian,
and of course, you had to have a.
Brian, you got to think the labels that those artists were on. That's Violator, that's Bad Boy. A lot of those were working in conjunction with those films to reach, as far as the audience for those films, to reach different demographics. Like if
absolutely,
if you put Busta Rhymes on this album, then maybe we'll get Busta Rhymes fans to watch this movie, and also to drum up album sales and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was my point. It's just like you would try to get, because that's the way you can either get people to come to the cinemas or to get people vice versa to either buy that soundtrack, or at least garner more attention and notoriety to that particular artist. Even if it was somebody like, oh goodness, I know Ja Rule had a song, I think it was on the Nutty Professor soundtrack, and I think that's how Foxy Brown got on, and then her career kind of took off. So it's like sometimes you would kind of like these soundtracks with these movies and artists will always work in conjunction, that you would see a lot of in the 90s. And then you bring in the video aspect of it as well, where they would incorporate the footage from the video, and people will want to check out the video so they could either see footage from the movie or vice versa. So it was a cool time back in the 90s to kind of see that that fusion of music and movies together. I mean, we don't get much of that now. Will Smith, we'll see if he we'll see. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little less of what I'm thinking about, but we'll see if Will Smith has a new single on the Aladdin soundtrack. But
that's gonna be fugly.
But but yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with that. But yeah, so that's my number 4 is soundtracks from the 90s.
All right, Lisa, your number 4.
My number 4. So the movie is from 1991, but this incident was from around 1995, 96, I'm guessing. And I was at Claudia's sleepover birthday party, just a bunch of girls having fun, and we're going through her VHS tapes to decide on what movies we should watch. And I was not allowed to watch PG-13 movies because I was not yet 13. So each movie she would pull out, I would flip over the box and go like, "Oh, I'm not allowed to watch that." And she looked me dead in the eyes and said, you're kind of ruining my birthday.
Oh man.
And tears pricked up in my eyes. I sucked them back in, and I stood my ground. And we watched Curly Sue. I know.
Whack.
It is super whack. I second that emotion. I don't have to tell you what Curly Sue is about. It's about a homeless man who befriends a child. It's a John Hughes movie starring Jim Belushi.
I remember liking Curly Sue.
Yeah, me too.
But I don't think I've seen it since 1991.
Because why would you? Frankly, why would you? Yeah. So, yeah, that's my sad tale.
Oh, those memories live with you forever.
We remained friends.
Yay.
Many years after that. We've since lost touch, but I do follow her on Instagram. She has 2 super adorable children. And, yeah. So, there you go.
We should hit her up tonight.
All right.
Tell her she should show him Curly Sue.
Oh, yeah. I don't really want to bring that traumatic incident because, I had one bad day. She had one bad birthday.
Oh.
So.
Yeah. All right.
Raining on parade since 1995.
Brad, your number 4.
The first thing I thought of when it was discussed that we were going to do a Fistful of 90s was Sundance, the film festival. Really, it kicked into full swing in the 90s. I guess 1989 with the release of Soderbergh's Sex, Lies, and Videotape, really changed the cinematic landscape. And then, you'd get a film that Brian really loves, Clerks, and Kevin Smith would own that decade coming out of the Sundance scene. But the movie that really had a tremendous impact on me as a young cinephile, and I've talked about it on this podcast in our Fistful of Influence many fistfuls ago, Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, 1992, right? Yeah, 1992. This was the film that told me you can find entertainment just through dialogue. And I remember specifically pressing play on it. And I didn't rent it. I went to Suncoast Video, speaking of the 90s. And I bought a VHS box of Reservoir Dogs because Steve Buscemi is on the cover and he's got his gun out and he's pointing up at Mr. White. On the box, you can't see Mr. White. I think in the corner you see the actual scene, and then the art is Mr. Pink pointing up. And I remember going these two guys are going to hold guns at each other. That's rad. Yeah. Totally rad. Super wicked. I need to check that out.
I still say rad and wicked.
So do I. Oh, let's be real. Let's not tweak on this. So I don't know if I've ever used the word tweak except for just that second, but what are you going to do? What's up, dog? Okay. Reservoir Dogs. You press play on that movie and suddenly it's just a bunch of guys at a diner talking about tips and Madonna and what Like a Virgin is about, which was a revelation because I did not know what Like a Virgin was about until that conversation in 1992. And I was engrossed by this community of thieves. And this was the film that took me out of Spielberg and George Lucas and films like The Monster Squad and The Last Starfighter and got me craving dialogue and conversation in my entertainment.
All right.
Talking about the 90s, I just learned what Dave Matthews Band, the song Crash. I literally just learned what that song was about. Granted, it's not like I've been thinking about it since the 90s, so never mind.
Yoink.
Let's go. All right. Billy, your number 4.
Okay, so my number 4, I accidentally closed my notes program.
That's whack.
You've already used whack.
You cannot repeat. You have to start losing these things. You cannot repeat.
Hey, let me bang out here.
No.
No, yeah, hard pass.
That means to have sex, guys.
Okay, then I'm in.
So instead of 90s slang, we talked
actually,
about...
it's just let me bang. I added the out. I apologize.
I have no response for that. So when I thought of the 90s, I did not think of slang. I thought of a lot of movies that I connected with as a young kid, and one of those kind of spoke to, I think, very much the feel of the 90s for like urbanite hipsters, city dwellers, going and doing their art and their day jobs and the comedy of it all. And I thought of Mike Myers in So I Married an Axe Murderer. Just the image of him going to a coffee shop to do his beat poetry and drink his giant coffee cups and make fun of it when he receives it is very much an image of the 90s, or at least a feeling of the 90s that's blurred into my head. Not to mention the fact that the movie is just studded. It's got a great performance from Phil Hartman, great stuff from Mike Myers. It's a really enjoyable, like, little comedy horror thriller about what's going on in this guy's life. But it screams that, like, there's very few films that put me back into that feeling of sort of what it's like to experience the 90s and what kind of like hipster culture was, like poet hipster culture, not like hip people, not actually cool people, but like poetry loving, new wave beatniks kind of cool kid culture in San Francisco. Yeah. So that's when I flash back to.
Tight.
Whoa,
man.
Whoa, man. She stole my heart and my cat. That's all I remember from that movie.
I love that movie.
All right. My number 4 is from 1994, and to piggyback off of Brad's Tarantino train, is Pulp Fiction. So, like Brad, having the experience where he realizes that a film could be entertaining through dialogue. I had the experience of understanding that all movies and all characters don't have to sound the same. Like the way people talk, all film conversation doesn't have to feel the same. And Tarantino is, I've said this on the podcast before, he's my favorite living director. And just the way that he has a distinctive voice and talent and is great at, and is such a film historian and such a huge cinephile that he fills every frame with some type of cinematic information, whether you're privy to it or not, whether you're looking for it or not, whether you want it or not, or if you need it or not. It's there if you seek out those things. And to have such a respect for the history of the craft that come before you, whether it be technically or whether it be with the actors, I think it goes a long way to inform Tarantino's voice. And a lot of people always give him slack and say he just recycles and doesn't do anything original. And I would argue that that's wholly untrue, because if you put any of the films that Tarantino takes homage or makes homage to next to his films, his film still has its own unique life and voice. And so that's something that you can't take away from him. And another thing about the 90s that happened is once Tarantino comes on the scene with Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction, and taking over the independent scene, now every other film in the 90s is trying to emulate that.
Right.
So you have,
and that's when you see what true imitation looks like.
Right.
But
right.
haters are going to hate.
So, but yeah, and the fact that I still have the loving relationship with his filmography now and the films that he's released since then, there are quite a few, there are so few directors who have such, based in my opinion, an astonishing track record as far as like his filmography, because we said on the podcast before, I just don't think he's made a bad film yet. And so, he's got to be on my list. And that is for 1994, Pulp Fiction.
It'll be interesting to see how his filmography ages with, our evolving language and a lower tolerance for hate speech and stuff like that. It'll be... I still love those films.
Echoing what we talked about with
Right.
Night of the Comet and our Weekend Dork. Yeah.
It's just curious.
Yeah, because I've been kind of feeling that way. I love Tarantino, but this is probably spirited to a different conversation. But I've been feeling that way about Reservoir Dogs. Like, I don't know if I still feel as fondly about that movie as I once did because of those points you just kind of brought up. Even I still think it's a brilliant film, but it just, I don't know. I'm just not that on Reservoir Dogs as much anymore.
Well, those guys are pure scum, and
Yeah.
and Tarantino certainly glamorizes criminals. and scum, it's. But like Lisa said, like you're saying, Brian, where are you going to come out on the
you
end?
evolve away from those things. I
Yeah.
think that's a normal relationship
Sure.
trajectory for a movie.
Yeah.
You change, your perspectives change, what you are capable of tolerating changes. I mean, you can full up on stuff, and you can
Exactly.
appreciate the goodness of the construction of the movie, and just not be there to handle that.
All right, Brian, your
Exactly.
number 3.
Jesus Christ.
My number 3 is explosions in action movies in the 90s. This is something that I didn't really take notice of until I listened to a commentary track, because I used to when DVDs came out. This was after the 90s, around 99, 2000. I started really kind of buying a lot of DVDs and listening to commentary tracks, and it was something interesting that I saw on the actual Shanghai Noon commentary track.
That's amazing. This is great.
I know. It's weird. It's so weird, and it's always stayed with me. They
That
talked
movie,
about a
Shanghai
deleted
Noon,
scene.
is super popular in the Marrier household. We loved that movie.
Oh,
That's my maiden name.
it's a great movie. It's a great movie, but they talked about how in the trailer for Shanghai Noon, you see Jackie Chan jump off of a train as it's exploding, but that scene I don't believe is in the movie. So on the commentary track, they talked about that, and they talked about how the studios insist that when they sell a movie, specifically an action movie, they always want to have at least one explosion because they feel that they need to have an explosion to sell a movie. And I just thought that was fascinating. So if you look back, it's a lot of movies from the 90s, regardless even if they need explosions or not, whether you watch the trailer or the actual movie, there's always at least one explosion in an action movie. And I just think that that's fun, and probably to this day. But
That's such a good
yeah,
fucking
Michael
pick,
Bay
Brian.
was really nice.
That's a good pick.
And it's just fascinating to me. If you look back at any movie, I mean, you can go back to the early 90s with T2 in 91. And it's just in the whole back of any action film through all the decades. But I think the 90s was kind of like that era of those specific type of action movies where you can see like studios really trying to sell people on the explosions and everything like that. So
and they were more
I don't know, I just
spectacular.
found
They
that
were real.
fascinating when I found out. Exactly, yeah. when I found out that little tidbit from the Shanghai Noon commentary track.
All right, Lisa, your number 3.
My number 3. So I've told the story about my first rated R movie in the theater being Cruel Intentions. Rachel Rogers, I guess, 12th birthday, 13th birthday. I was definitely not old enough to see that movie. That's where I learned that that women could also be kissed on the downstairs. I did not know that was a thing. But I've already told that story. Yeah, that's not 90s slang. That's the slang of today. I'm innovating. So later that same year, or maybe no, the next year, my sister decided she wanted to be daring. And she wanted to be a cool older sister. So she decided she was going to use her ID to get me into a rated R film. And it was at what's now the Bowtie Cinemas at the Reston Town Center. And she made me like hide behind the corner while she bought the tickets because she was 18. Of course, my sister was like physically a late bloomer, so I just looked older than her already. But she was like, no, you have to go hide over in the corner, and then I'm going to go up and get the tickets, and then we'll both walk in really quickly so they can't see that you're like, 14 or whatever I was. I guess I would be 14 because my sister's 4 years older than me. So the movie she decided to scandalize me with was 200 Cigarettes.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
I'll read which is essentially just people smoking and having conversations.
Oh.
The conversations that I don't remember being particularly scandalizing, considering that I had already heard about kissing the downstairs.
Yeah.
So I was just like, what makes this movie rated R? So you do get to see part of a butt.
Did they drop F-bombs?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
according to Kids in Mind, they say nearly 40 F words several anatomical references, lots of scatological references. Somebody does fall in dog do. I remember that. And some mild obscenities and insults. One obscene finger gesture. One that I would later get in super big trouble for giving my sister, not related. And by super big trouble means somebody was mad at me. But yeah, so 200 cigarettes with my sis.
That's amazing.
Brad, your number 3?
For my number 3, kind of piggybacking off what I was talking about with Reservoir Dogs, Arnold Schwarzenegger in the 80s, tremendous hero, right? And his last film of the 80s was Twins in 1988. His first films of the 90s in 1990 was a twofer, Kindergarten Cop and Total Recall. Then in 1991, my first theatrical R-rated experience was Terminator 2, Judgment Day. But the year I want to talk about, the significance of this year, it's 1993. It's the end of Schwarzenegger's reign on my life. And it came with The Last Action Hero. A film that I have grown to appreciate, but I remember watching this when I was 14 going, that's not Commando. He's not funny. He's not cool. The action is lame. Rubber baby buggy bumpers. No. Did not like it. This be tripping. I had to get rid of Schwarzenegger from that point forward. And then, if you look at it, this is kind of when, the Sixth Day starts to happen, End of Days, Collateral Damage. He has, after Last Action Heroes, he has True Lies.
Yeah, what are you talking about?
That's a solid movie.
There you go.
Solid movie? That's
Solid
what you had to say
movie.
about True Lies? These are bad opinions.
No, it's a solid film. It's no Commando, Billy.
Oh my gosh.
And I just remember being really, really, really tremendously disappointed by The Last Action Hero and how not cool it was, and I hated that kid.
Was that the first time like an action hero star like really disappointed you about what they were like? Did you get hyped about the movie and that's what it was? Was the letdown?
Well, yeah, most certainly that was it. It's not the first time. I think the first time that happened was Alien 3. Was that before 1993? Alien 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like 92, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was probably the first cut where I realized that movies could actually be bad. Although in both cases, Alien 3 and Last Action Hero, I've come around on, and I enjoy Last Action Hero quite a bit. I wish it wasn't PG-13. I wish there was a different child actor in it. But he's no worse than Edward Furlong, if we're going to get real.
He's better. I'm sorry, I like Last Action Hero.
I like Last Action Hero too.
There was a sequel?
Leo the fart did not come back. Anyway, so Last Action Hero. It was a big turning point, like Reservoir Dogs. It might have aided in my appreciation of the indie films and Sundance films because the large blockbusters were collapsing in front of me.
All right, Billy, your number 3.
Sure. So my number 3 is the first time I saw a Star Trek movie in the theater was Star Trek VI, Undiscovered Country. Yeah. So that was 1991, and so for me, I was 9. I want to say because it was 82. So yeah, 9. So it was 9 when that happened. Yeah, I'm a young guy.
Yeah, baby.
Oh God. But no, the Star Trek, became a big part. That was a family show for us to watch Star Trek: The Next Generation, and it was something I think that we did as family bonding times. I mean, we would we put the show on. This was back before TiVo and your ability to easily record television. So if you wanted to watch a show that came on during dinner time, you would eat dinner and watch the TV show.
TiVo, I don't remember that at all. I remember everyone was talking about it. I was trying to figure it out, and I was like, what's the dealio with this? Made no sense. TiVo.
Well, it's digital recording. It's handy.
I get it now.
No, I know. You got there.
I know
That's
the
cool.
dealio.
You know the dealio.
I figured out that dealio.
Jesus Christ. But no, so Star Trek that was the kicking off point. It's really the first movie that I really remember going to see in the theater, like as a family. That was a family event. I know that we'd gone to see movies before that, but I think if we were going, it was to see a kids movie, which my parents patently weren't really interested in. It was just, we're taking the kids to see a movie. Star Trek 6 Undiscovered Country, first time we went and did a family thing, and that became something that defined our family experience for the better part of a decade.
Star Trek 4 was my first Star Trek film in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was Star Trek Generations.
Nice.
All right. My number 3 is kind of sort of still on the Tarantino train, and it is Tony Scott's True Romance. And it's on my list because, it was written by Tarantino, and I love the script. But more importantly, with the 90s, Tony Scott was a huge influence on the 90s, whether it be talking about myself or Hollywood and filmmaking.
And well, I mean, Tony Scott, even in the 80s, he had a very specific 80s mark. And then in the 90s, a very specific visual style. And then in the aughts, a very specific visual style. He evolved.
Yep. And that I really respect about that filmmaker, someone who can do that, who cannot rest on their laurels or what they're comfortable with or what they've had success with in the past, who is not afraid to experiment and try new things, because at the end of the day, as an audience member, I only benefit from that. I get a different type of storytelling. I get a particular voice, but of saying something in a different way, and so I appreciate that. But yeah, True Romance is one of my all-time favorite films, and it's because of, again, Tony Scott. It's because of the script by Tarantino, but the cast is insane, and the performances are. Everyone brought their A game, and it's just one of those rough, dirty gems from the 90s. I love the look of the film, literally film. It adds to the grit of the script, and so yeah, it submerges Alabama and Clarence in this world, this horrible, filthy, and gritty and violent world, and so you just want them to be safe, hand in hand, and make it out alive at the end. So yeah, that's got to be my number 3, True Romance.
I do not think I would want to ride on a Tarantino train. Like I love hearing about your Tarantino train, but I wouldn't want to ride on it. I think it would smell like feet.
Possibly.
Yeah, for sure.
Possibly. Brian, your number 2.
So my number 2 kind of goes to a little bit of what you and Brad have been talking about a little bit with Tarantino, is the trend of the indie boom in the early 90s with Tarantino, with Miramax, and unfortunately to have to mention the Weinstein Company. But, I mean, what they were doing in the early 90s with Rodriguez, with Tarantino, with movies like El Mariachi, Desperado, Reservoir Dogs, and then we see that later on in the mid-90s with movies like Swingers, which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and
How is
Doug
this
Liman,
not on your
and
list?
how that kind of what, Swingers?
Yeah.
Well, it is now. I mean, it's part of this.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you were building to another film.
But Swing. No. I'm just talking about the indie boom.
My bad.
With
Sorry.
with Miramax. Yeah, I mean, because those are some of my favorite. I mean, just to your point, Brad, Swingers and Good Will Hunting, 2 of my top 5 movies of all time. I mean, this era was just such a pivotal change, I think, in the movie landscape. I mean, going from what you were saying in the 80s, where we had a lot of these kind of sweeping epics and a lot of adventure films that we were getting from Spielberg, but to kind of come into the 90s and kind of see how the landscape of movies have changed, where we did kind of focus on a little bit more character-based and get more into like some of the quirky characters or interesting or characters that are a little bit shady, almost kind of harkening back to some of the stories that we were getting in the 70s, because we always see how trends are a cycle. It's like a revolving door. And I thought we were getting something kind of similar to maybe what we were getting in the 70s, but just with a slightly different twist to it, where you're starting to see a lot of these filmmakers starting to see their creativity come through. You mentioned Kevin Smith with Clerks. So it was just interesting to see that time. And I think from the opposite, not just from a fan's perspective, but from the perspective of content creators and filmmakers, it was an exciting time for them, because I think it gave a lot of young filmmakers that energy and that to really go out there and really create, because it felt like a time where they could really make their mark as a director in that industry in Hollywood, and you saw a lot of people start to do that, and it just seemed like it was an exciting time for the indie boom to really hit around the 90s.
You have to wonder if A24 and Annapurna and companies like that would be what they are today, if there would even be a thing, if Miramax had not done what they did in the 90s, because it's kind of what what A24 is doing now and what Annapurna does now, as far as distributing like just indie stuff and focusing on stories, less big budget fare and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I mean, I also feel like the independent scene is dead. I mean, it's dead as Dillinger. What we saw then is not what's happening now. There are independent movies, but for the most part, like, A24, that's Jonah Hill's new movie.
But what Fox picked that up and put that out, Universal. What I'm saying is, like, the movies that Universal, Fox, and
Fox Fox Searchlight, like, big studios started to manufacture the independent film
because of
certainly. But I feel like the independent scene is long gone.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Getting dumped on Netflix.
Yeah.
But that's a new thing, though. The independent scene stuff getting dumped on Netflix. I think it's just...
I think those are two separate conversations. I don't know. This is a much longer conversation.
I was going to say.
Yeah. I'm not ready to have it on this slamming podcast episode.
It's just a big box of shit. Like, let's get into it.
All right.
I know.
Wife Dork.
I know. That's a separate podcast.
All right, we'll put a button in it. Wife Dork, your number 2.
So I had a story about my older sister being the cool older sister.
Yep.
So I have a story about my older brother trying to be the cool older brother, which there are not that many stories about Joe being the cool older brother, because he listens and he'll admit he's not that cool.
Oh, man.
But he did. So my parents were driving out to Williamsburg because my sister was going to William and Mary because she's super smart. And but she majored in theater, so not that smart. But so they had driven to go see her, and so Joe was like, "Let's go to the movies, let's just go." So me and my little brother John got in the car with Joe, and he drove us to what is that theater where there used to be a Tower Records?
Oh, the Regal.
Yeah, Regal. Something. So we went to the Regal, and either they were out of tickets or Joe had fucked up the time or something. But for one reason or another, like, we couldn't see the movie right away. And we had like a whole movie's length of time before we could like see the movie. And that my family had like strict, you have to be in the house by this time or there's hell to pay. But Joe's like, whatever, we'll just go kick around Tower Records. And my stomach was literally like butterflies. Like, we're getting in so much fucking trouble. So we're just like kicking around Tower Records and hanging out. And then we go to see the 1999 classic, Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me.
Yeah, baby.
And we saw that movie. And this was, of course, before cell phones. I would not get a cell phone until my 21st birthday. So we drive home and check the voicemail, and it turns out that Mom and Dad had called the house and we weren't there, and they were driving back from Williamsburg And we were in a fuck ton of trouble. And by trouble, meaning that our parents were mad at us. And I do not like getting yelled at. So, yeah.
All right.
It's a
Austin
long
Powers.
drive, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not short.
There
And
were
they
some
were,
crosswords, I'm sure, spoken.
they were not happy to do it. No swears, though. When my mom would get mad, the worst thing she would say is crap. And but when she said it,
You know.
oh, man.
Atom bomb.
And yeah, oh, really bad. And my dad would swear when injured only. Yeah, so that's it.
All right. Be your number 2.
So Billy talked about the first Star Trek film of the 90s. And this is again, a story of hurt for Brad, like Last Action Hero.
Oh, no.
I'm not talking about Undiscovered Country. I'm talking about Lisa's first Star Trek film, Star Trek Generations in 1994. The passing of the baton from the original series crew to the next gen crew.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I've told this story on this podcast, but
about the script?
a year before the film came out. So sometime in 1993, I went to a Star Trek convention in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
Yeah.
And Brent Spiner was there, and he was the big draw. And at the time, he was such a big draw that he would not do signings. You had to just go and purchase a signature, and then you would get a photo with his autograph on it.
Oh, man.
It was $20. So he wouldn't sign in front of you. They just had a stack of autographed photos that he would do his presentation up stage, and then that would end, and then you would go to a booth and be like, here's my $20, and they'd hand you an 8x10 with his name on his
$20
signature.
though. That's like a deal and a
Yeah,
steal.
it's like $80 now if you go to Vegas to get a Brent Spiner autograph.
But he signs it in front of you.
And this was the first time that I felt that desire to read a screenplay. I went to this one dealer in this convention, and they had a bunch of Star Trek scripts. And one of the scripts that they had was for the next generation movie, Star Trek Generations. And I remember going home, actually going to my grandfather's house, and sitting up way too late, or into the early mornings, reading the Star Trek Generation screenplay, going, this can't be the movie. You know, it opens with the Enterprise B. The screenplay opens with this champagne bottle slowly floating into space, colliding onto the newly christened Enterprise B. And we see Kirk, get sucked off into the Nexus. Where
Sexy.
he will... Stop that, Lisa.
I'm sorry.
Talk to the hand.
Oh, geez.
Oh, man.
And it was not the send-off that 15-year-old Brad wanted for Captain Kirk. You know, him falling off of this cliff with a bridge on top of him. Captain's on the bridge. Bridge on the captain. It just
Is that what they were going for?
that's what Shatner said he wanted to say at one point during the filming of that movie. Bridge on the captain.
Thank God somebody said no.
Yes.
Wow.
And I don't know if he's facetious when he tells that story, but I don't think so.
I think the truth of that story is he thought about that about 6 to 10 years later.
Yeah. Well, that might be true too. Anyway, so I'm reading the script. I go, no, this is not how it's going to go. I wasted my money on this, and who knows? I probably paid like $20, $50 for that screenplay.
Yeah.
I have no memory on the price. So flash forward a year later, 1994. I'm sitting in the theater for Star Trek Generations, super excited. And the first thing you see is the champagne bottle
Classic Brad.
go into frame. And then I just remember thinking, no! And mentally, for the entirety of that film, I just went, no! As everything played out like that screenplay.
How old? So how old were you for that?
1994, I was 15.
15. So what was, like, as a Star Trek fan, what were, like, did you have peers your age who appreciated the Captain Kirk episodes as much?
I think that's hilarious, Billy, that you thought I had a friend who also watched Star Trek with me.
Aw.
I mean, I would talk to Mom, but Mom liked everything. So she enjoyed Star Trek Generations when we went and saw that together.
But you would go to Star Trek conventions.
Yeah, do you
as
think
a
I
kid?
talked to people when I was at Star Trek conventions? No, I did not.
Okay.
I did not. I was a much more isolated human being as a child.
Oh. I'm not
Or as
not
a
asking
teenager.
to needle you. I my experience with Star Trek was really just the original crew were movies for me. I never saw the episodes as a kid. The original TV series.
No, the movies was my love. I didn't come to the 60s television show until college.
No kidding. But you were that invested in Kirk and disappointed in his send-off.
Yeah. Star
No
Trek's
kidding.
2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 as a kid.
Were everything.
Yeah, I mean, I loved them. I didn't love them at the time as much as Star Wars, but they were right there. And then, like, the greatest sin of Star Trek Generations was them reusing the Klingon bird of prey explosion from 6 as the
Yeah, they
same
fucking
one.
did.
Yeah. And I just remember going like, what's that shit?
I recognize that.
Not only does this screenplay play out just like I read, what a horror show, they also steal an effect from part 6. That was the last movie.
Do you remember the movie Money Train?
Oh, hell yes.
Okay, so there's a subway sequence where that subway car goes off the rails and it rolls and rolls and rolls.
Right.
And that was such an expensive effect that they had sold that effect to other movies to use in that. And you can see glimpses of that footage in great subway crashes in other 90s movies.
Now, like Last Action Hero, I have revisited Star Trek Generations many, many times, and I have grown to appreciate a lot about that movie. It's not a perfect film by any means, but I think the Enterprise B sequence is actually pretty darn good, and I think the meeting of Picard and Kirk inside the Nexus is interesting, and I might even get a little emotional watching that sequence. Bridge on the Captain, still dumb. Soren, I love you, Malcolm McDowell, not a good villain. The Duras sisters, no. I didn't like him in the show. I certainly didn't like them in Generations. What are you going to do? So, yeah. Is it the worst film of the Next Generation crew? No, that's Nemesis.
Yeah. All right, Billy, your number 2.
So, it's... I talked a little bit about, sort of my experience with the 90s, and that there are some movies that just put me back into this mindset of what it was like. As a younger kid, it was just a lot of open doors. Where were things going to go? And I think I was far more optimistic or open about where things could be. I'm not negative about where I am. I don't mean to say that. I just mean at 35 as opposed to 15. You've made some choices that have irrevocably defined your life, and you are on a path. And sometimes it's interesting to me to revisit things that evoke that similar emotional response of things that open doors. I'm not totally sure. Brad is smiling, and I'm not sure what's about to happen.
I'm not going to say it. I just
you.
saw a 90s slang that I'm just not going to talk about on this.
Appreciate that. But so, unrelated to the fact that we're going to do a 90s episode, I happened to just decide to watch Empire Records the other day. And that is a pure 90s movies with its own... It's got some issues. It's got some issues.
I never liked that movie.
I like parts of it very much. But what I was very surprised about stumbling back onto it just 2 days ago was how much I immediately was back in that kind of emotional mindset of the 90s of because the whole idea of damn the man and just, I'm going to do the things that make me happy and I'm going to just be willing to take risks. That's so antithetical to where I'm at in my life. I have no ability to take risks at this point.
You don't throw down?
And things. No, I don't throw down. I don't throw down. I work for the man. I am the man. I suck up to the man. I do whatever I can for the man because I like my house and I got to pay for kids and shit like that. But
I'm real straight edge.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I can't. But it was just interesting to see Rory. It's Rory Cochrane, right? Who's the kid who wears the turtleneck through that whole fucking movie?
I don't know.
He's the one who goes to Vegas and bets all of Joe's money. don't know. It's just something about that movie where I fall back into it. And I guess that there are movies that are still like that for me that do it. And it's interesting when I kind of stumble onto them because I'm not the biggest fan of Empire Records. But I do kind of like being transported to a different emotional place from time to time.
I mean, I think that's a lot of what we're talking about, right? You pop on a Kevin Smith movie, boom. I am in a time and place.
Yeah. It's there. I don't know. It's like you get. There was a line in Venture Brothers at one point where one of the kids wanted to put on an album, and the guy's like, "Well, I got a lot of memories locked up in that album. I'd really rather not." And you stumble on those movies that really do transport you. I don't know if it's quite nostalgia. I don't know if it's exactly that because I don't miss that or long for that. But when I stumble onto it, it's nice.
I think that's what I was talking about with you with the Friday the 13th films, right? Like 1 through 4 are so of that early 80s slasher era.
Yeah.
There's a comfort, like, and I guess that comfort is nostalgia.
I guess, yeah, and I think that might be the word for it. But I mean, we talked about that a little bit with Phantasm too, because I didn't watch the Phantasm series as a kid. And it was weird to go back and revisit that.
Don't start talking about it.
I'm not bagging on Phantasm at all. I'm not bagging on Phantasm at all.
Because I will open a can of whoopings. I will.
But no, it's just interesting how entwined those things can be in a place and time, and how easy it is for us to be transported back to that.
All right, great pick. Let's see. For my number 2, this is a film that has been on a fistful or 2 of mine in the past, and I've told the story a couple of times in the past, so for the sake of brevity, I will not repeat it, but for 1992, Hard Boiled has to be on my list if we're talking about the 90s, and specifically if I'm talking about films that spoke to me or defined who I was then or even as of right now. Because of this film, I'm right here doing this podcast right now because of Hard Boiled. My daughter is who she is right now because of Hard Boiled. The fact that I have a daughter right now is because of Hard Boiled. I love this film. One of my favorite action movies of all time, directed by John Woo, stars Chow Yun-fat, and yeah, I love it. This is the movie that got me into filmmaking for new listeners. I will go into it very briefly. I saw this on a Christmas Eve as I was putting together toys for my siblings. Spoiler alert. And I put this movie on to watch while I wrap gifts, and I ended up watching that entire movie without wrapping a single gift because that movie opens with probably one of the greatest shootouts ever filmed. And so by the end of the film, I started watching that movie sitting on the floor in front of the TV. By the end of the film, I was sitting on the back of the couch, like where your head would be. I was sitting up there, and I remember having like my hand over my mouth, like at the credits roll. Like I had never seen anything like that, and I said, this is what I want to do. And so that experience would shape decisions that I would make from that moment to today. So yeah, I owe a lot to Hard Boiled, and that's why when there are discussions about John Woo on the podcast or even off the podcast, that's why there's a sadness in my voice because of a great many things I've experienced because of that dude. So yeah, that's my number 2. All right, Brian, your number 1.
Well, actually, it goes to your point, and it's kind of funny that you brought up Hard Boiled because my number 1 trends for me personally in the 90s was the influence of Hong Kong and Chinese cinema on American cinema in the 90s. And there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of look at that. One I'll kind of point out is Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan, I think, first really got noticed to American audiences when Rumble in the Bronx came out. In 1996, I believe it was. And then you saw them kind of repackaging a lot of his films for release, Yeah, Super Cop, which of course is Police Story 3, or Operation Condor, which was Army of God. And so yeah, you started to see this, and then even kind of rebranding and repackaging movies like Fist of Legend, with Jet Li, and then you see Jet Li coming over, and then everybody, and you see all these action stars coming over from Hong Kong and starting to make movies over here, and then just influences that we've seen from movies like Hardboiled and The Killer, where you would see, whether it's in the movies or some of those cheap action movies that you would see on the covers at Blockbuster with people holding two guns. Or people would have references to people like Chow Yun Fat, where you would hear that Ken Ivory Wayans say that in Low Down Dirty Shame, and I was like, Chow Yun Fat, and then like once you find out who he is, he's like, oh, that's Chow Yun Fat. So it's just just seeing how American cinema kind of embraced and was really influenced, and in some ways kind of stole a lot of the thunder from Hong Kong and action cinema. But the great thing about it is that, especially for me personally, it kind of redirected me to those films in Hong Kong to really make me appreciate those films and to see where a lot of those influences came from, a lot of the action movies that we saw in the 90s, especially when you started to see some of those action stars move into American cinema. Unfortunately, their movies weren't as good as the movies they made overseas, but because we kept saying, oh, Jackie Chan, Jet Li, Romeo Must Die is not a great movie. He could have had a better
that's
introduction.
nice. You're being nice.
I'm trying to be nice.
I like Hard Target. That's as good as it gets, folks.
Yeah. And everybody was like, oh, where's Donnie Yen? Where's Donnie Yen? And, but it's funny, though, because now we don't even really kind of clamor for that anymore, because I think the way foreign cinema is so accessible, specifically to like cinephiles, we see somebody like an Iko Uwais or even a director like Gareth Evans. We're not saying to ourselves, oh man, I wonder what they can do if they were in like a Hollywood film. I'm like, for me personally, I would just rather them continue making movies in Indonesia as long as we have access to those films to watch them. I don't need to see these stars do, trash cinema like Mile 22. I don't need to see that. So it's just
I'd like to report a
see,
murder.
But yeah, it was really cool to see those influences from that cinema, and them kind of pay respects towards that. So you saw a lot of that in the 90s.
Jackie Chan, Jet Li, and John Woo is why I started watching foreign film.
Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
All right. Lisa, your number one.
I think this is my number one pick because I think this is like your prototypical 90s movie. When you think of the 90s, if you're not thinking about Titanic, you are thinking about this. Titanic did not come up on this list.
So it is a chick flick?
Yeah. It's also a movie that was... Oh, I didn't even hear you guess.
The Matrix.
The Matrix. Oh, that's also true. That's also a 90s movie. Man, oh man. We had such long, boring conversations about the Matrix. I'm flashing back.
That made mad cheddar, though.
But this is this is a movie that was propelled largely by its soundtrack, I think. But what made it on my personal list of 90s is because it's another movie that made me swoon. And it is Romeo plus Juliet, 1996.
Yes.
So this was one of, like when you were in college, like one of the things you would get is you get the TV VHS combo. Even I got one going to college in 2002.
I had one for a week. It broke. It stole a cassette tape and never gave it back.
Oh, no.
Aww.
That would be fun. I still have like my college VHS tapes in my closet. That would be a fun.
I will not tell you what the tape was.
Uh-oh. So this was one of the VHS tapes that my sister would take to and from William and Mary. And like I saw the movie and I was just like, I fell for Leonardo DiCaprio. But I had been teased so viciously about Devon Sawa and other crushes that I had at school and stuff. Having older siblings is tough, and so I decided not to speak the name of my true love. But I knew that I was of like the age where it's like okay to have crushes and stuff. But I couldn't stand being taunted over being in love with Leonardo DiCaprio. So I decided to tell my sister and my friends that it was not Leonardo DiCaprio I was in love with. It was Mercutio, played by Harold Perrineau. Who I stand by. I think he's got a sweet face. And in that movie, he is like wearing like a sequin skirt. And he's got these legs for days. He's looking fine. So I was
He's got those tight T-shirts.
He's got the hookup
really
with the
cutting glass in
ecstasy. So I'm like, that's the
This
man
is amazing.
for 8th grade me. Yeah. That was a secret I was considering taking to the grave, but I'm not.
Podcasting.
I would
It's go time.
I would wake up in the middle of the night and like pop in the VHS and I would like press my face against, because we weren't allowed to watch TV at night, and so I would press my face against the speaker so I could hear, and I would watch Leonardo DiCaprio like this from like this bottom angle with my face pressed against the screen, getting the glass all foggy. I loved Leonardo DiCaprio, and I could not admit it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Lisa.
I feel funny.
All right. Good, because it's time for your number one.
Number one, I'm also going 1999. I'm picking my favorite film of all time from 1999. We all know that my favorite film of all time
Jaws?
is Star Wars: The Phantom Menace.
Oh, yeah.
Not!
Oh shit!
Psych!
Double shit.
I do not like Star Wars: The Phantom Menace.
Oh. Okay.
But it was... my list is really skewed negative.
Your
These
list
last-
is very, like a fanboy
the
loses faith.
The 90s hurt you.
Yeah, the 90s hurt me.
That's a
The
lot of
90s hurt
sadness.
me.
That's what I'm taking away
But like
from
when I think the 90s, like I have to think about the time before Fandango, before movietickets.com. You had to go to the movie theater to get your tickets.
did.
And advance tickets, they would go on sale months before the film would come out. And in Phantom Menace's case, it was like 6 months. I want to say it was right before the summer. So I think like May. I was in college going to George Mason University. I was actually on my way to class, and I was driving by the Centerville Multiplex Cinema. And I saw this massive line. And from the road... I look and I see one of the guys in line is wearing an Obi-Wan Kenobi robe. And I go, fuck, today's the day. And I skip class. I pull into the parking lot immediately. I join that line. And it's like 12. It's like noon. The tickets don't go on sale till midnight. So I get in that line. And I hang out. And I know I was talking about how not social I was with the Star Trek conventions.
Sure.
But with Star Wars was not Star Trek. Still is not Star Trek. Everybody on the planet loves Star Wars. So you get in that line and it's family immediately. And they're playing games. They're talking about the original trilogy. They're talking about the Battle of Endor and how it gets a bad rap. No one's talking about the holiday special. And if they are, they're just taking a big old dump on it. And that's really the extent of our ferocity back in that time period towards the Star Wars franchise. The only thing we did not like was the agreed upon Star Wars holiday special. We were with Lucas. That's not canon. Let's ignore it. Even though Boba Fett is introducing that. So I'm in line. I order pizza. It's delivered to us. I share my pizza with my fellow nerds. And we wait. And finally, they sell us the tickets. And I had physical Phantom Menace tickets in my wallet from like May. No, it wasn't May to Christmas. When, what? Like, hold on. So it must have been in the fall.
I think.
Yeah, it must have been in the fall. And then May 4th is when, or May, whatever. That first weekend in May was when Phantom Menace came out. So I had those tickets for like 6 months in my wallet, burning a hole right in it. Yeah, it came out May 19th. Thanks for the save there, Lisa. And you you wait, and it shows up. I of course did the midnight screening. I remember people having their lightsabers in the theater with them lit up.
Rude.
But it was part of the spirit at the time. It was, it wasn't an Alamo Drafthouse, Lisa. It was national
Put
amusement.
a card up.
And the movie starts, the crawl happens. And the other thing is, like, between this time period, we had seen trailers. Like, we all bought tickets to meet Joe Black so he could see the Phantom Menace trailer on the big screen. And
That movie's better.
yeah, Meet Joe Black is better than the Phantom Menace, but we didn't know it at the time. I actually don't think I watched Meet Joe Black. And to this day, and when I say I don't think, I know for a fact, because to this day I have not seen Meet Joe Black, but I did buy tickets to watch the trailer. And then I remember also downloading the trailer, early days of the internet where it took like 3 hours for that trailer to download, and then I watched it for like 3 straight hours. And I remember seeing in the first trailer, you don't get a lot of Jar Jar Binks. You get a little bit, but that little bit of Jar Jar Binks in that first trailer, I was like, I don't know about that. And then that second trailer came out. You're like, oh boy, I hope all this other stuff around Jar Jar Binks is really rad. Like this Jake Lloyd kid looks really good. Ooh. Opening crawl happens. Phantom Menace. Okay, all right. It kind of feels like an opening crawl but even the crawl doesn't quite read like the crawl you want it to read because you've been building up what a Phantom Menace crawl should look like. And then the opening sequence happens with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan fighting the battle droids and those alien, what do they call the Trade Federation guys?
Trade negotiations.
The trade negotiation aliens. And like, I know we've evolved, quote unquote, we've evolved from society. But even back then I was like, that shit's racist. and this, I wasn't terribly familiar with the Stepin Fetchit characteristic, the Misa Wisa stuff. And now looking back, you're like, George Lucas, what the hell were you thinking? But I didn't recognize that in 99 as being racist. Those Trade Federation dudes, straight up racist caricatures, ugly as hell. So then the movie keeps going, and it keeps going, and I'm going, boy, this movie's not good. The movie ends, and we all stumble and shamble out of that theater. Our lightsabers are not raised. They're dragging on the ground.
They're half-mast.
They're half-mast.
Oh,
And I watch it 6 more times.
Just
be
to
sure.
To be sure. And after the 6th time, I was like, yeah, no, this is a bad movie. And
what the fuck
So,
was your
Brad.
mindset on the third watch and the fourth watch? Like, they're gonna switch the third reel of the film, and it's gonna be some different shit.
In that process, I would come away, like on the second watch, I'd be like, that Darth Maul shit is rad. Totally rad. Love that Darth Maul. Then the third watch, you're like, pod racing's pretty cool. Yeah.
Greg Proops.
Watto.
Craig Proops, that's right.
Watto. That's a choice. You go back and forth trying to find things that you like about it.
Yeah.
And you're like, boy, I love that shiny silver ship. That Padme flies around it. Yeah. That's really cool.
So, Brad,
Yeah.
you had that opinion of the film the very first time you saw it,
I came out
as far
of
as like knowing.
I came out of Phantom Menace saying I liked it. But I'm not joking. I was lying to the world. And I remember coming home to my mom, and she was awake. And my mom was like, how was it? I was like, it's great. You're going to love it. And as I was saying it, I was lying to her.
Damn.
But it really,
Okay, so you
I'm not
were
joking,
into
though.
it now.
Like, I did six watches before I really decided I did not like the movie. And then I watched it a couple more times, just to be sure on that, too. I think I saw it like eight times. I want to say I saw Phantom Menace 8 times in the theater.
Okay.
I only saw Attack of the Clones 3 times.
All right.
If only Letterboxd existed at that time, so it'd be like 5 stars, 4.5 stars, 4 stars.
After that 6th watch, I probably would be like 3 stars. It's not, I don't like it, but it's 3 stars. It's not like the worst movie in the world. But then
Man.
then I'd see Attack of the Clones. I'd be like, maybe Phantom Menace isn't that bad. Maybe Phantom Menace is 3.5 because this Attack of the Clones is 1-star dog shit.
But that's an eye-opening experience for fandom. I mean, it takes the goggles off of what it is and what that stuff means to you, right?
It totally changes. It's the beginning of online conversation, and it leads to.
So you're saying the internet, as it exists today, and social media is Phantom Menace's fault, kind of.
I'm not necessarily saying it's Phantom Menace's fault, but that was at the beginning of this toxic fandom that we talk about today, and I feel like it does me no good to bring up Phantom Menace again. The last thing the internet needs is another fucking asshole going, this Phantom Menace is garbage. And I appreciate how, in the wake of the reaction to The Last Jedi, Simon Pegg comes out and he says, I regret harping so much on Phantom Menace. Watch a movie, you don't like it, write a review, and move on. And Brad, just move on. But we're talking about the 90s, and when I think about the 90s, this pops up. So, what can I say? Did I do that? Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
All right, Billy, you're number one.
Yeah, on that note. Goodness gracious. Oh, boy. So I think, when I think about the 90s, I think that as far as movies go, the single biggest impact that it had on me, that it still has on me today, is my relationship to Bill Murray as an actor and the movies that he put out. I think that in no small way, it has impacted my sensibilities on a number of fronts, for better or for worse, as the case may be. But, the movie that comes to mind when I think about that for the 90s, because even in the 90s, I didn't see all of his movies in the 80s. I'm really discovering his earlier films as I go through the 90s. But then I hit Groundhog Day when that comes out. And I think that was the first time that I realized, I fundamentally understood that you could make a comedy about sad people. That sadness can be funny, and that you can have layered characters who are deeper than the quip that they put out, and that the smile that they put on for the people around them, or the acerbic witticisms that they put on, can be driven by things that are deeply and profoundly troubling to them. And I realized how much of who people are drives what they say and how they interact with other people. So, I mean, in a lot of ways, I really connected with that movie and took away a lot from it. And I think that that's part of why my relationship with Bill Murray, and my appreciation for him, continues to stay. I mean, I did the Bill Murray mood indicator on my Facebook page as a gag for the better part of 6 months, because I like what he does as an actor, and I like what he brings to it. But, the later 90s for him was him getting into Rushmore and working with Wes Anderson more, and really embracing the acerbic wit that he kind of brings to the screen. And I like that very much.
His rise into icon is fascinating. It's
is.
not like he was never a major celebrity. He was always a major celebrity. Once Saturday Night Live hit, boom.
For sure.
Major. But now he's a bumper sticker,
Well, I like his disdain for the fandom, and I like his lack of interest in doing anything other than what he wants to do with that particular fandom. I think the thing that defines Bill Murray is that he is going to fucking do what he wants to do. Like I said, for better or for worse, he's going to do what he wants to do. And I think that's an interesting approach to fandom. I don't, I can't imagine being in his position and being so young and being so incredibly famous from SNL. And then, what do you want to do? Mm-hmm. And you just are a very, there's a lot of anger that is fueling your comedy and the things that you do.
Yeah.
And how do you go forth creatively?
He's a real OG when it comes to celebrity status.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I can't.
All right. My number one, this is for the year 1991, and it is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yay!
Oh, damn, this is 90s.
It is not fucking Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Oh.
My left eye contact almost fell
Jumped out of your face, right?
Wow.
Now, while
But that arrow boa cam.
Stop. You're making me regret even saying that.
Oh, yeah.
1991 produced
Bryan Adams.
Double Impact. In the 90s, at this point, I was a huge Jean-Claude Van Damme fan, And so 91 produced Double Impact, but it also produced The Last Boy Scout. And it's such a hard choice to decide which one to pick. But I'm going with neither of those because I got Tony Scott on my list for True Romance, even though I love The Last Boy Scout. But 1991, and this is going to go to...
You gonna do Jig?
No, this is... Yeah, this is going to what Brian talked about. 1991 saw the release of both Boys in the Hood and New Jack City. So they're my pick, and not specifically just because of the movies, and I'll explain it, but also to what Brian was talking about. So in the 90s, at this point in the 90s, in 1991, we are starting to get some of the best hip hop music that has been created to date. And in my opinion, the 90s version of hip hop, the 90s era of hip hop was the greatest. It's the golden era of hip hop, right? Mm-hmm. So, at this point, NWA's doing their thing, and now here's Ice Cube starring in a movie, right? And the cast of that movie is incredible. You got Lawrence Fishburne, you got Angela Bassett, and it's directed by a black man. And it's not glorifying the negativity in hood life or gang affiliated life, living. It's showing the pain and the ugliness of that. But also in that same year, we had New Jack City, also directed by an African American, and this is Mario Van Peebles' film. But this film also has, and Brian, I got this one on my list because both of these films spoke to what you talked about, that era where there was a hip hop act associated with a soundtrack, but specifically with movies that featured either a hip hop actor or an African American cast. That that entire soundtrack is cultivated and revolves around either the ideas and themes of this film or just that genre of music that would go to fuel the feeling of any one of these films. So when New Jack City comes out and within the black community, before the movie even comes out, like Brian was talking about, like we're already excited for the soundtrack, right? Mm-hmm. And the soundtrack comes out would historically come out either a few months prior to the movie or a couple weeks, and you would get that soundtrack, and it would just get you hyped up to see this film. That coupled with the trailers, that coupled with the fandom of the artists that are on the soundtrack, and then when these movies would put these artists in the film, it just solidified you having to buy a ticket, right? And so the soundtrack for both of these films are artists that I still listen to today. I still listen to the soundtrack to New Jack City to this day. But that period of time when music was such a big part of my life. So this would be I'm like a sophomore in high school in 91, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I'm a sophomore in high school. So what I would do back in the day, I would say the transition time from middle school to high school, before I was into movies the way that I am into now, I was into music, but still in a cinematic way. So what I would do is, because I was teased and picked on as a kid in school, and I dealt with the bullying shit, and I didn't have my first girlfriend until after I graduated high school, so I was 18. So like for me, that life, that high school life of getting the girl or standing by the locker or passing notes, that was all like fantasy to me.
It's all movie stuff.
Right. And so like I would make that movie in my head, but what I would do is I would take songs and I would make a mixtape, and these songs would play during the scenes in my movie, so I could see the movie by listening to these songs. And so I would make tapes and I would fill them up front to back, and I would watch these movies in my head every night. When I lay down to go to sleep, I put my Walkman under my pillow, put my headphones on, lay on my back, look up at the ceiling, close my eyes, and watch that movie. And so music was a huge part of my life because it would dictate the scenes to my life that I would live in my make-believe. And then, it got to a point where now I do that in real life. I have like playlists, and we do it when we go to the gym, or I do it in my day-to-day when I'm at work. I have a at-work playlist that fuels my idea of how I want this day to go, how I want to feel, how I want to be. And so that all started like back then in the 90s. That was a huge time. Again, so those two soundtracks, Boys in the Hood and the New Jack City soundtrack, it was filled with artists that I loved. and those were two of the soundtracks to my life, literally at that point in time. And these two films are phenomenal films, you know, especially with John Singleton, the Boys in the Hood being his debut, such a strong debut, and Mario Van Peebles having such a rich history in cinema through him, not only himself but through his father, and in blaxploitation cinema, would craft in New Jack City because in the black community that and I've spoken on the podcast about this before, the Scarface story, the rise and fall of somebody coming from nothing and then getting everything, you know, in America, in a country that says like you don't even belong here. That appealed to part of the black community, right? And so you would see Scarface pop up in, you know, gangster rap, you know, music videos, like that lifestyle of, you know, I came from nothing, I made this for myself in spite of the odds, against the man and against the world, you know, that appealed to them. So, you know, New Jack City was our version of that through Wesley Snipes' Nino Brown character. And, you know, he's a deplorable person, and the movie makes no bones about that. But Wesley Snipes' performance as Nino Brown. So I rewatched this, I want to say a month ago, not too long ago, and I posted about it. But, you know, as much as I don't like Weslly Snipes, the person, and my beats with him, I won't front and say that he isn't. That's my.
I saw what he did there.
All right,
I had that saved for later.
Oh my God.
I won't front and say that Wesley Snipes does not deliver a very cold but yet calculating performance in Nino Brown. And so, yeah, so these two movies are a huge part of my life. They got me through the next day at school throughout my high school years. So yeah, it's funny that you brought that up. Not funny, Brian, but you know, that fact that you brought that up is something that, you know, I can closely relate to, because that was you know, that's what happened. That's what was our movie going experience, our music experience. I was going to Sam Goody, buying soundtracks to the movies and stuff like that. That's what we did.
Yeah,
so
that wall of cassettes.
Waxy Maxis.
Yeah. So that's my number one.
I hate.
It's funny.
You go ahead.
It's funny you. Oh, sorry. It's funny you say that, because I was thinking about what you were saying then, and it's kind of funny now, 2018, how we're kind of recreating that with the whole soundtrack thing. Because you think about Black Panther earlier this year, and you had Kendrick Lamar
and A Star Is Born, Brian.
The soundtrack comes out. Yes, Brad. But and you had that soundtrack to the movie, and it kind of gets people excited. But now you kind of have this companion piece to that film, kind of in the same vein of how those soundtracks were in the 90s. Mm-hmm. So I like how they're kind of like recreating that again this year. And we're seeing that for Creed 2 I just read about. I can't remember what producer it is, but he's going to be curating the soundtrack for Creed 2. So you're seeing these companion pieces that speak to the movie as well, right, that can also get people, introduce people to the film and get people excited for the film as well. Right. That, like you say, you listen to New Jack City, the soundtrack, even to this day, I think 20 years from now, people are going to be saying the same thing about the Black Panther soundtrack. Like, they can go back and still listen to that soundtrack and give them that feeling of how it felt, you know, to either see that movie or certain songs that they hear. So I kind of like how it's kind of having a resurgence to some degree. Whether that sticks or not, you know, that remains to be seen. But I kind of like how we're seeing that again now.
Yeah. All right, listeners.
Okay, can I say my thing now?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I mean, it's completely inappropriate, and you can edit it
out. Is it the
is
90s slang I refused to say earlier?
Oh, no.
No.
Don't say that.
No, nobody is waiting with bated breath for that.
It was Pooh Nanny.
Oh, shit. Okay, I feel really comfortable saying this now.
No.
So when you said Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and I said yay, it was because for a second I thought you were talking about Robin Hood Men in Tights.
Yeah.
That movie. That's like my New Jack City. I walked down the aisle to the Men in Tights song.
Yeah.
Men in Tights. Yes. That movie's not okay. I haven't seen it since.
Dave Chappelle's in that movie.
Yes, he is. Carrie Elwes was in that movie, which is why I saw it. And
of course.
I was into the blondes. I don't know what was my deal.
I see.
Richard Lewis. Don't hear about that dude anymore. Tracy Ullman, Patrick Stewart.
Yeah.
Richard Lewis is way 90s.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
All right.
Isaac Hayes is in that movie.
You can hit us up on social media at ItModcast and let us know what your top 5 picks of the 90s would be. Your fistful of 90s. You can follow Brian at the Turtle Dork on Twitter, at the Turtle Dork 1 on Instagram, and at Brian William Young on Facebook. You can follow this lovely young lady, Lisa Gullickson, wife dork, at Sidewalk Siren on Twitter and Instagram. She is at Bake Dork.
I haven't baked anything since before Fantastic Fest. I'm horrible.
Yeah.
I just haven't had time. Is really what it comes down to.
Just follow her at Sidewalk Siren.
I will tweet from at Sidewalk Siren
on Twitter and Instagram. But also, you know what? Follow her on Big Dork, because when she gets new notifications of new followers, maybe that might prompt her to get back into the groove.
You're just sad because I'm not letting you taste my baking anymore.
I really am.
But have you noticed how much slimmer the Dork Cave has gotten since I haven't been able to bake?
No, I don't want to correlate the two, but it's the truth.
It's the truth.
All right. You can find that guy, Mouth Dork, at Mouth Dork on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Letterboxd, and Untapped. And I'm Darren Smith, the Disco Dork, on all social medias. That's going to do it for us. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go watch a movie. Go see mid-90s. What else comes out today? If you haven't seen Halloween, check that out, please. And then listen to our review cast. But what also comes out this weekend? Nothing. Dry. Sorry. And mid-90s, is that getting a wide release or a limited release?
Well, last week it came out in New York and L.A., so it's a wide release now.
Okay, so go check it out.
I'm a big fan of it.
Yeah.
Now let's bounce.
Wow. All right, that's going to do it for us. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Until next time. Peace out. No, you're supposed to say Audi 5000.
Audi 5000.
Oh, God.